Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you are from and what time you are watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let us begin. It was Saturday, the 26th of August, 1871, in New York City. The afternoon sun beat down upon the Hudson River Rail Depot, where steam engines hissed and whistled, and the smell of coal smoke hung thick in the summer air. Passengers hurried across the platform, clutching carpet bags and parcels, their voices lost beneath the clatter of iron wheels on rails. The city was thriving in these post-war years, its population swelling with immigrants who arrived daily seeking fortune in America's greatest metropolis. Grand Central Depot stood as the gateway to westward journeys, its platforms crowded from dawn until dusk. Among those who frequented the station was a 12-year-old boy named Alexander Potts, called Paddy by all who knew him. He earned a few pennies each day by assisting travellers with their luggage, darting between the crowds with the practiced ease of one who knew every corner of the depot. On this particular afternoon, as the heat shimmered above the rails and the afternoon express prepared to depart for Chicago, young Paddy noticed a lady who seemed uncertain of the procedures. She wished to check a trunk. She required a ticket. He guided her to the counter, watching as she purchased her fare westward. What the boy could not know was that his curiosity about that trunk would unravel a mystery that would grip the entire nation. The lady carried herself with an air of quiet composure. She was neither young nor old, neither richly dressed nor poorly attired. She wore a dark travelling dress and a modest bonnet, and she spoke little. When the express man arrived with the trunk upon his cart, she seemed both relieved and anxious in equal measure. Paddy assisted the porter in lifting it from the cart to the platform, and it was then that he noticed its peculiar weight. The trunk was not large, perhaps 3 feet in length, yet it required the strength of 2 men to move it even a short distance. The lady paid the expressman and shook his hand, a gesture that struck young Paddy as unusual. Ladies did not typically shake hands with workmen. He watched as she turned and walked toward the platforms, but when he looked again moments later, she had vanished. He had not seen her board any train. He had not seen her leave the station. She had simply disappeared into the crowd, as if she had never been there at all. The trunk sat in the freight office, marked for Chicago, but bearing no sender's name. The baggage master, a man named O'Brien who had worked at the depot for 15 years, noticed it, among the other luggage awaiting transport. He attempted to lift it, and found himself unable to do so, alone. The weight was extraordinary. Trunks carried clothing, books, household items, none of which should weigh so heavily. He called for assistance, and together with another porter, they managed to move it to the checking area. It was young Paddy who insisted something was amiss. He told the porter about the lady who had disappeared, about the strange handshake, about the trunk's impossible weight. The porter dismissed him at first. Boys were always seeing mysteries where none existed. But Paddy persisted, tugging at the porter's sleeve, until finally the baggage master was summoned. O'Brien stood before the trunk for a long moment. The afternoon heat pressed down upon the depot. Somewhere a whistle sounded. Passengers called to one another. The baggage master knelt down, unfastened the locks, and slowly lifted the lid. The smell struck them immediately. Putrid, overwhelming, unmistakable. The porters stepped backwards, covering their faces with their hands. O'Brien removed the blankets that had been placed atop the contents, layer by layer, until the horror beneath was revealed. A young woman lay curled within the trunk, her body forced into the fetal position. She was unclothed, her skin discoloured and swollen. Her hair, once golden, now hung limp about her shoulders. The trunk bore no marking, no address, no indication of who she was or who had placed her there. The baggage master closed the lid and sent word immediately to the 18th Precinct. Within the hour, Inspector Walling arrived at the depot with 2 constables. The trunk was sealed and removed to Bellevue Hospital, where it was placed in the dead room under the supervision of Warden Brennan. The young woman was lifted from her confinement and laid upon a table for examination. Even in death, her body maintained the terrible position into which it had been forced, suggesting she may have been placed within the trunk while still living. She had been beautiful once. That much was evident despite the ravages of death. She was tall, perhaps 5 feet and 7 inches, with delicate features and slender hands. Her age was estimated at 20 years, perhaps slightly more. Upon her body were found no marks of violence, no wounds, no bruising that might indicate struggle. Yet she was dead, and the circumstances of her death were such that foul play could not be doubted. The post-mortem examination was conducted by the hospital physicians on the 27th of August. They determined that death had resulted from acute metroperitonitis, inflammation of the peritoneum caused by the consequences of a mishandled pregnancy termination. The young woman had been with child, and someone had attempted to end that condition. The procedure had been performed crudely, without proper medical care. An infection had followed. She had died in agony, her body racked with fever and pain, before being concealed within the trunk and transported to the station. The newspapers seized upon the story with fervor. The New York Times, the Herald, and the Tribune all ran accounts of what they termed the Great Trunk Mystery. Who was the dead woman? Who had killed her? And who was the mysterious lady who had checked the trunk at the station only to vanish without trace? The only witness who could describe the woman was young Paddy Potts. He told the police she had been neither tall nor short, neither young nor old. She had worn dark clothing and a bonnet. Her face he could not recall with any precision. She had seemed, he said, like any other person, unremarkable in every way. Inspector Walling, who commanded the investigation, faced an seemingly insurmountable puzzle. The dead woman carried no identification. The trunk bore no markings. The mysterious lady had disappeared. The only tangible lead was young Paddy's recollection that the express man's cart had borne a name either Trip or Trap. He could not remember which. The police began their search for the express man. They located a Mr. Trap, who operated an express service in the city. But when Paddy was brought to identify him, the boy stated with certainty that this was not the man he had seen. The investigation seemed to reach an impasse. Meanwhile, the body of the unknown woman was displayed for public viewing at Bellevue Hospital, in the desperate hope that someone might recognize her and come forward. Hundreds arrived to view the corpse. They filed through the dead room in solemn procession, handkerchiefs soaked in carbolic acid pressed to their faces against the overwhelming smell of decay. The heat of late August accelerated decomposition despite the ice packed around the body. Each day the smell grew worse. Each day more curious onlookers arrived, drawn by the macabre spectacle that the newspapers had created. On the 28th of August, just 2 days after the trunk had been discovered, a breakthrough occurred. An expressman named William Picketts presented himself at the 18th Precinct Police Station. He stated that he had read of the case in the newspapers and believed himself to be the man who had transported the trunk. He lived on the corner of 27th Street and 1st Avenue, and he informed the police that on the morning of the 26th of August, a woman had engaged his services to collect a trunk from number 687, 2nd Avenue, and deliver it to the Hudson River Rail Depot. The woman had paid him $5, he said, and he had returned $4 in change. The delivery had seemed routine at the time. He had thought nothing more of it until reading the newspapers. Young Paddy Potts was summoned once more. He was asked to examine Mr. Picketts and his cart. After a moment's consideration, the boy nodded. This was the expressman. This was the cart. He was certain of it. The address Mr. Picketts had mentioned, 687 2nd Avenue, was the residence and practice of Dr. Jacob Rosenzweig. Dr. Jacob Rosenzweig was a figure well known in certain quarters of New York society. He was an abortionist, one of many who operated openly in the city during those years. He advertised his services in the newspapers under the name Dr. Asher, offering relief to women in distress. His practice was conducted from the house on 2nd Avenue and from another residence on Amity Place, where he maintained rooms for patients who required extended care. The New York abortion laws of 1871 were relatively lenient. Licensed physicians were permitted to perform the procedure before quickening the moment when fetal movement could be detected, typically in the second trimester. Enforcement, however, was lax, and the city was filled with practitioners both licensed and unlicensed who offered their services to desperate women. Dr. Rosenzweig was known to have performed hundreds of such procedures. He was not a licensed physician, but neither were many who practiced similar trades. Just 1 week before the trunk was discovered, the New York Times had published a feature article titled "The Evil of the Age," sharply criticizing the widespread practice of abortion in the city. The article had mentioned Dr. Rosenzweig's establishment and the reporter who wrote it now came forward with crucial information. He stated that during his investigation for the article, he had visited the house on Amity Place and had observed a young blonde woman among the patients there. He was convinced that the woman in the trunk was the same person he had encountered. The description matched: tall, golden-haired, approximately 20 years of age, with delicate features and a gentle demeanor. The medical evidence supported the theory that the young woman had died as a result of a botched termination. The post-mortem examination revealed severe infection and internal injury consistent with an improperly performed procedure. Samples were sealed and preserved. The findings were recorded in formal reports. The evidence, though circumstantial, pointed inexorably toward Dr. Rosenzweig's involvement. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let us continue. On the evening of the 28th of August, Inspector Walling dispatched Sergeant Rooney and another officer to the house on 2nd Avenue with instructions to arrest Dr. Rosenzweig. When they arrived, the doctor was not at home. They waited. In the early evening, he returned and attempted to enter unnoticed, but the officers recognized him from the description they had been given, a man not very tall, but quite stout, weighing over 200 pounds. He was taken into custody and transported to the police station, where he was formally charged with willful murder. He denied all knowledge of the trunk, the expressman, or the dead woman. The warrant was read. He was remanded to await trial. The trial of Dr. Jacob Rosenzweig commenced in November of 1871 at the New York Court of General Sessions. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity, with spectators crowding the galleries and spilling into the corridors outside. The judge, whose name was recorded as Justice Sutherland, presided over proceedings with stern authority. The prosecution presented its case methodically. They called William Picketts, the expressman, who testified that he had collected the trunk from 687 2nd Avenue on the 26th of August. They called young Paddy Potts, who described the mysterious lady and identified the expressman's cart. They presented the post-mortem findings, which detailed the cause of death as acute metroperitonitis resulting from a botched pregnancy termination. The critical breakthrough in identifying the victim had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Theodore Kine, a physician from Paterson, New Jersey, had read of the case and believed the deceased to be Miss Alice Augusta Bowlsby, a patient of his who had failed to return from a recent trip to New York. He mentioned that Miss Bowlsby bore a distinctive vaccination scar beneath her left elbow. This detail was confirmed upon examination of the body. Dr. Kine brought with him a dentist named Dr. Joseph Parker, who had recently performed dental work on Miss Bowlsby. Based on his examination of the deceased woman's teeth, Dr. Parker corroborated the identification. Alice Bowlsby had been 20 years old, the daughter of a widowed mother in Paterson, a Sunday school teacher of gentle disposition and unblemished reputation. The defense attorney, Mr. William Howe, of the notorious law firm Howe and Hummel, mounted a vigorous defense. He argued that no definitive proof existed that Miss Bowlsby had ever visited Dr. Rosenzweig's residence. He produced a woman named Anne Bowlsby from Brooklyn who claimed ownership of a handkerchief bearing the name Bowlsby that had been found among the doctor's possessions. He noted that Alice's mother had not personally identified the body, casting doubt upon the victim's identity. He even suggested that Walter Conklin, a young man from Paterson who had been acquainted with Miss Bowlsby and who had subsequently taken his own life, might have been responsible for her death. Despite Mr. Howe's efforts, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the 16th of November, they returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Dr. Rosenzweig stood motionless as the verdict was read. The judge sentenced him to 7 years of hard labor at Sing Sing prison. The death of Alice Bowlsby provoked widespread outrage throughout New York and indeed across the United States. The case had exposed the extent of illegal abortion practices in the city and the terrible consequences that befell vulnerable young women. The New York Times published numerous editorials condemning the malpractice, portraying Alice as a victim of circumstance, a young woman of limited means but considerable charm and grace, qualities that had ultimately proved perilous. Medical institutions across the nation, united in support of stricter legislation. Within months, efforts were underway to reform abortion laws and establish proper medical licensing requirements to eliminate unqualified practitioners. The case of Alice Bowlsby became a rallying point for those who sought to protect women from exploitation. Yet, justice, it seemed, would prove elusive. Dr. Rosenzweig's attorney filed an appeal, arguing successfully that the trial judge had allowed improper testimony from a former patient. A new trial was ordered for November of 1872. However, in April of 1872, New York enacted comprehensive legislation making abortion illegal under nearly all circumstances. Because Alice Bowlsby's death had occurred before this law took effect, Dr. Rosenzweig could not be prosecuted under the new statute. The new law also repealed the old legislation under which he had been convicted, leaving no legal basis for his continued imprisonment. In a decision that shocked the public, Dr. Jacob Rosenzweig was released from Sing Sing prison in the spring of 1872, having served less than 1 year of his sentence. He disappeared from public record shortly thereafter. Whether he continued his practice elsewhere, or whether he abandoned the profession entirely, remains unknown. The tragedy had claimed another victim as well. Walter Conklin, the young clerk from Paterson who had been acquainted with Alice Bowlsby, had been unable to bear the weight of rumour and speculation surrounding the case. On a quiet afternoon in September of 1871, while working at Dale's mill, he had calmly walked into the silk storage room and discharged a pistol into his own head. His farewell note spoke of the worthlessness of life and his unwillingness to embarrass his family by testifying in the matter. His father, a prominent alderman, was left to mourn a son destroyed by scandal and grief. Alice Augusta Bowlsby was laid to rest in Paterson, New Jersey, in a cemetery whose name has long since faded from memory. The newspapers that had sensationalized her death eventually moved on to other tragedies, other mysteries. The trunk was destroyed. The case files were sealed and stored in municipal archives, where they gathered dust for decades. Years passed. The house on 2nd Avenue was demolished to make way for newer construction. The Hudson River Rail Depot was eventually replaced by larger, more modern facilities. Those who had known Alice, her mother, her students from Sunday school, her friends grew old and died themselves, taking their memories with them into silence. The name Alice Bowlsby, once spoken throughout the nation, became a whisper, then a footnote, then nothing at all.